today's sermon, I actually have a really hard time titling sermons, but I think I'm going to call this one, Who Do You Listen To? And the reason I want to do that is that in this reading, which I acknowledge, and forgive me, can be a little bit confounding because it's talking about, who's going to let you judge, who are you going to let judge you, who are you going to have adjudicate your disputes between you. I talk about that issue quite a bit, so I actually don't want to focus on the fights, although we can talk about that and I can link to some of the other sermons where we've discussed it before. But what I'd really like to focus on is the question of who you listen to. And it's actually more complex than we might think, and I think that's what the apostle is getting at today. Who gets to decide for you who's right? How do you make decisions about what is righteousness and what you want to leave behind or not touch? And the root of all of that, I would argue, is your values. Now, what are values? Values are the place from which we decide everything in our lives that is at our discretion. Our values are our principles. It is how we understand what is right and what is wrong. It's how we set intention to our lives. It's how we build priorities and we decide make trade-offs. Your values are where that comes from. And what I believe the Bible is getting at in this passage is that you can't let your values be an accident. You can't allow all these voices in your head to influence your values. What you want is intention. And for Paul, he says that your values begin at your beliefs. So let me start with what happens when we don't think and talk about values. And I'll acknowledge confessionally that I tend to talk very little about this here. Forgive me. I'll try to fix that today. But I do it because it can be such a charged term, right? A lot of time values, like family values, can be used as a way of defining who's in and who's out. If you don't line up with my values, maybe you feel like you're less than me. Maybe I feel that way too. And so we kind of shy away from being forward in our language of defining values. But let me, for a moment, just tell you what's at risk if we do that. I want to talk to you about absorptive values. These will be the values that you will absorb if you don't have intention in your values. And that can come from anything. Like, think of what it could be, like commercial values, capitalist values, American values. All of those are not necessarily Christian values, right? And the key here is that if your core value is absorptive, if it is coming at you from the advertisers and the politicians and the people on the news and the people in the neighborhood who you don't even know, don't know you, and don't really care about you, those values will still guide your decision making, and your principles will come from that place, all by accident. We do not want to allow absorptive values to have any say in how we live our lives. And yet we do. So here's an example for just to make it a little bit more concrete. And I want you to think about some values you may have absorbed from whatever setting you're in. But I'd say the biggest one is that a lot of us make a decision, or a number of our decisions, in terms of protecting ourselves. We make decisions out of our fears. And when our fears are guiding us, we can sometimes compromise some of the other values that we would rather put first. And I'm going to talk about what those are in just a minute. But think about the values or the decisions that come out of our fears. They teach us that first and foremost, we have to make money, right? That's the easiest way to shield yourself from some of our deepest fears, like not having appropriate shelter and all that. Those things are important. I'm not telling you not to think about them, but if they're your core initial value, then unfortunately, some other parts of what God calls us into can be compromised. They're important, but they can't be first. Fear-based values are harmful to you, and they are harmful to the people around us. It can't allow us to build community. I want you to think also about any other values you may be absorbing, and really take some time with this in your prayer life. I would invite you to do this week. But when we then notice what our absorptive value systems are, then we can make choices about how we set them aside as thoughts we can have, but not core values. What should be your core value, at least according to Paul, and I believe according to Jesus? It's that you follow him. You follow Jesus. You follow Christ. And how do you do that? You lead with love. Love comes first. If love is your core value, it makes everything fall into place. Then protecting your safety and your person out of an act of self-love is quite different than it being out of an act of fear. Do you see the difference? And that is key. And when we start to say, no, Lord, help us to set aside these absorptive values. Help me to set aside the fears as the starting place for my decisions. And instead, we start with love. It makes everything easier. It's not easy, but it's right. And the reason it's right is that it is exactly what you were created to do. So when we put love first as our main value, we find ourselves in beautiful alignment with God's intentions for our lives. And then everything else falls into place. So if you have some sort of major decision before you, or you're facing, I don't know, a big moment maybe, a transition in your life or something, and you have to make some choices about what to do, I invite you to think, how would loving first inform this choice? What is the most loving way to love God, neighbor, and self in whatever is coming before me? And if you take a look at all of these things, all of these places where you've got to make some choices, and you put love first, all of a sudden, that decision-making rules out a few options and maybe invites in some new ones that you hadn't thought of before. Love first. If we love first, if we pay attention to God first, if our core value is to love God, neighbor, and self, in every choice that we make, we start to see our life come into a sense of purpose. And then some other things kind of fall off our shoulders. It is a way that we make a brighter day for ourselves. It is how we start to feel the warmth of God in all aspects of our lives. Because God's values are ours. And when that happens, everything is right. That's living victoriously. That's living kingdom life right here. That's an opportunity for you right now and into your day, into your week. Love first. Love first. Love first. Amen. Amen.